Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can. Welcome to Wise Squirrels, the podcast for late diagnosed adults with ADHD. I'm your host, Dave Delaney. Today I'm speaking with Brooke Schnittman. Brooke is an ADHD coach. She's a best-selling author, speaker, and she's the founder of Coaching with Brooke. She combines 20 years of expertise in ADHD and executive function coaching, and she transforms chaos and frustration into focused success. We got started by talking about Brooke's background and how, even as an ADHD coach, she hadn't been diagnosed with ADHD yet, but she found out.
Dave, thanks for having me. I'm also a late diagnosed ADHDer like you. Believe it or not, I have been working with people in the ADHD field for 20 years. And I myself didn't know I had ADHD until 5 years ago. So fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm.
Graduated from my master's in students with disabilities from NYU, was a special education teacher working with ADHDers in the classroom, was an assistant director of special education, working with parents, families, and kids. Started my business Coaching with Brooke in 2018, ADHD coaching business. Still didn't know I had ADHD. And 6 months into it, I then realized very quickly that I was like my clients. When I was working with them online, I started noticing that I was having a hard time going from the session, which I loved, to doing my notes and then coming back and shifting my attention back to the session and then going back to my notes. Like that system wasn't working for me. And then it started clicking and I got the diagnosis. And 6 months after that, I met my non-diagnosed ADHD husband at the time and his two non-diagnosed ADHD sons. And we are one big ADHD family with a 2.5-year-old toddler who displays ADHD symptoms as well.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I relate very personally and professionally to the fields.
Well, it's interesting too, because, a lot of and I've got to stop saying the word interesting. Listeners have commented. I say it way too much. So now it's going to be like a drinking game every time I say it, even though I'm 4 years sober. But
there's this real estate. Oh, congratulations. There's
thanks.
a real estate person on YouTube that says everything is amazing. So my husband and I make fun of him. And yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
We all have our words.
Yeah. I'm like, well, why couldn't I say something like, I don't know, something more interesting, like pamplemousse?
There you go. Now you're going to start saying that.
Yeah. Little French grapefruits. So I find it interesting there. See, okay, you can take a drink.
I just did. Water.
Perfect. Yeah. Stay hydrated. So you started in education and you were working with, students with disabilities, you said.
Yes. With ADHD, learning disabilities, and anxiety.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so much of that goes hand in hand, as I now know. With students, well, how old were the students? Like what age group or grades or what have you?
So primarily I was in 6th grade. And then when I became an administrator, I was working in the middle school, so 6th through 8th. And so it's funny because I always gravitated to the kids who were working really hard, who just, it took longer. They needed more systems. And I didn't know why I gravitated to them. I just thought that, these were the students that I wanted to work with. And in the special education setting, I was working in a collaborative classroom with a general education teacher. So The students were of average IQ to above average IQ, but they were struggling with ADHD, ASD, anxiety, learning disabilities. And that was my jam. I loved it. I helped them execute, increase their executive functions. We had a separate study skills executive function class that we worked on with them, and I loved it. But then once I got into the administration end of things, as much as I enjoyed administration, I didn't love the paper pushing, and I didn't like the politics and the red tape. And it wasn't using my strengths, which I now know are, working with people and relationships, and I'm a visual and kinesthetic learner. I need to be hands-on, right?
Yeah.
So all that paperwork and sitting down at a table and doing IEP meetings was definitely not my strength.
Mm-hmm. What about earlier, like as a kid? Like, how old were you when you were diagnosed?
It was only like 5.5 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was 35.
Okay.
I just turned 35.
Yeah.
And I'm 40, and I'm 40 now. So it was, when I was growing up as a kid, I was diagnosed with auditory processing disorder. But my mom, who is in education, and my dad, who owned a school, right? They were like, oh, well, she had a lot of ear infections, so it makes sense that she has this diagnosis. So I had speech, but the two didn't go together. One thing, I wasn't communicating as much when I was a child, but that piece didn't have to do with auditory processing. The auditory processing was doing multiple step directions, right? Mm-hmm. So now, fast forward, it's the chicken or the egg. I have no idea if I have an auditory processing disorder or if it was just hidden ADHD at that time.
Yeah, because things
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, like with anxiety and things like that, like I know those are like comorbidities caused from the ADHD. Yep. So, yeah.
Yep. So I was diagnosed with anxiety, and I was seeing psychologists and psychiatrists on and off my entire life because I was bullied from the age of 8 to 35 when I actually received coaching and then started coaching. And I didn't understand why, when I was going to the therapist, that I was leaving more anxious. We were talking about my anxiety and about my feelings, but I was anxious going into it, and then I got even more anxious, right? Like I felt like I dealt with all of the anxiety, or I suppressed it, right? But I wasn't getting the skills and the tools to deal with it. And also, at the time, I didn't realize I had ADHD. So the things that I was doing to try to manage my anxiety, a lot of it was caused by my undiagnosed ADHD.
Yeah, go figure. And being female doesn't help you in the diagnosis world, especially, traditionally speaking, for ADHD being the naughty boy syndrome, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And no, like you, I was always a high achiever. I would always hide behind my work. I would defined myself by being a hard worker. In fact, I remember my administrators when I was a teacher would always commend me. Wow, she's the hardest worker I see. She's there before the administration. She leaves with the custodians, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how I define myself. But I didn't have all of those wonderful relationships and everything else that life had to offer when I was doing all of those things. I was working, it took me 2 times the amount, sometimes more than that, to get the things done than the other teachers. I was spending so much time visioning and creating, but not actually executing.
Did it help you?
My plans.
Yeah, did it help? I'm kind of assuming the answer here already. I assume that the answer is yes, but it must have helped you having 2 educators as parents too.
100%. Yeah. So growing up, my parents are also high achievers, and growing up, my mom would always make sure that she would sit down with me, get my homework done. I had tutors if I needed to. They would push me. My mom would push me into accelerated classes, even though I wasn't accelerated. She would say, nope, you can do this. But really, I didn't know at the time why I couldn't do it. It was because I had a hard time processing the information. So it just took me a longer time to get it, but it doesn't mean that I couldn't do it. But yes, I definitely utilized my parents a lot growing up, to the point where I remember before going to my demo lesson in the #1 school district in the country, I passed my interviews with flying colors because I had this whole binder of all of these presentations and it looked beautiful, and I prepped for the interview. I knew what to say. I'm a people person. I can come off really well the first time, right? And I remember my demo lesson, I was freaking out. I was 24 or 25 at the time, I don't remember, and I was in my New York City apartment, and it was the night before my demonstration lesson, and I started bawling because I had to do a lesson on evolution. And I had all these ideas, but I didn't know how to put it together, right? I was too in the visioning of it and not in the execution. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know the next step. I could not put the pieces in priority from beginning to end. So I called my mom. I was hysterical. She called one of her science friends, and he helped me talk through it. And then the next morning, I was supposed to be on time at 9 o'clock to this lesson, and I had never dealt with rush hour traffic, leaving a little bit later from Manhattan to get to this demonstration lesson on Long Island. And I was an hour and a half to 2 hours late.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I not only was late, but I forgot I needed markers for my projector, because at that time we were using projectors. Like you probably remember growing up, Dave.
Yeah.
And
like overhead.
So overhead projector, right? So then I'm driving to Long Island, and I'm like, you know what? I kept calling the principal, and he's like, okay, no problem. We'll move the whole classroom to the next classroom for your demonstration lesson. So then I stopped at CVS and got crayons to use for my overhead projector.
Oh.
And yeah, so don't even ask. Don't even ask.
That's not going to work well.
That's not going to work well, but believe it or not, the lesson went surprisingly well. And the assistant principal was in the room, and he was a science teacher in his former life. And he said, that was an amazing demonstration lesson, but you did it on genetics, and we were looking more for evolution.
Oh, whoa. Whoops.
Yeah. And guess what? I got the job, right? And I definitely performed for the job. But this just goes to show, like, when you don't have the help that you need to plan and execute and process information, and you don't know like where to start, how to get the steps together, you could be the best visionary in the world, but you need the right support and the tools to get it done. So that was my big aha moment, where I was crying to my mom and having her help me pick up the pieces.
There's a good message there too. I mean, a couple things, like, you know, the line is that ADHD is like as hereditary as height. And I've had a couple of guests say that, and I've researched it, and it's actually not quite accurate, but it's almost as hereditary as height. I think height is a little more hereditary, but just a pinch. So, you know, it's a good reminder for parents that are listening to be patient with their kids or the children in their lives who may or may not be, but, you know, perhaps they are. And especially if you, the listener, have ADHD, you know, there is a likeliness that one of your children or both or more have ADHD too. So being patient with kids, I think, is such an important message here. I mean, luckily I married an educator who's neurotypical and is like just amazing in all the ways, and has been a great mom. And I've been a great dad. Our son just not took off. That sounds terrible. We're great parents, and our son just took off.
Took off.
No. Yeah. No,
Nice knowing you.
No. He just went to college. We just moved him into his dorm a week or so ago. And then my daughter's a senior this year and plans to do the same. So I say that.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah. But I say that too, because, I think you mentioned, you might have mentioned that that I too was perhaps a high achiever or something. And that is completely inaccurate, because for me, I just had I'm a child of the 70s, and my parents were completely neglectful. And so for me, I failed almost every grade, I wasn't held back, but I pretty much failed every grade. But every teacher graduated me to the next class because they didn't want to have me again, because I was such a class clown and so disruptive.
Oh, wow.
And then I had a teacher in 7th grade who finally held me back, because he was amazing. And he's like, yeah, you're not ready for high school, so let's cool it for a second. And he was really great. But when I did get held back that year, my dad yanked me out of that school and put me into a small independent private school that was in a house. And in that school for 8th and 9th grade, my grades dramatically changed to A's and B's from D's and E's, probably, because I was on a first name basis with the teachers. So there was a mutual respect. There was 10 kids in my classes. So it was impossible to cut class or to screw around much, because it's pretty obvious when you're doing it that way. So I quickly learned, and my grades got very, very good at that school. And of course, once I went to high school, everything unraveled, and it took me, it was not pretty.
That just goes to show that the education system is not always set up for ADHD kids, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're in a big classroom of, let's say, 30, 33, right? And you have ADHD undiagnosed for you, right? What support or differentiation were you getting at that time, child of the 70s? And then you're in a small class. It's a lot more personalized, a lot more differentiated. It's easier to focus in a smaller setting, right? Not to say that that's always the right fit, a more restrictive environment for a child, but those ratios, especially, if you're in, let's say now, a public school and there is a special education teacher in the classroom, the ratios go down. And if both teachers are working to support all of the kids, then you can get that smaller environment and the differentiation that you're looking for. So, but I hear you. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot on parents. It's a lot on the children. It's a lot on the teachers. And I think going back to what you were saying about parents being patient, if you have ADHD as a parent and your child has ADHD, now it's a whole other ballgame, because you're not only managing your child, you're managing yourself. And if you're not able to manage yourself with your ADHD, then it's a lot harder to manage your child with ADHD and then for them to follow through. Because if you can't plan the implementation of the calmness and the collaborative problem solving when you're trying to work with your kids, it's hard. Because again, we're constantly without help trying to figure out how to manage ourselves.
Yeah, no, makes complete sense. So when did you launch Coaching with Brooke?
In 2018, I launched it. So when I used to live in New York, and then I left the public school education, came to Florida, wanted to start my own business in education to some extent, some sort of special education. And after dabbling in several things and actually receiving coaching in a group setting, I had stumbled upon another ADHD life coach who was similar background to me from New York. And she said, you would be amazing at this. And I was so motivated to move beyond working for someone and doing the same thing that I used to, that I said, I don't care, just sign me up, right? And she said, okay, do this, do that. So I got my certifications, I started my business, and then I maxed out on clients, and then I brought on other coaches. And at our peak, we had 8 coaches, 15 staff members, and we do one-on-one and group coaching for adults and for students and parents. And it's been amazing. There's been a lot of creativity, a lot of transformation in myself, my coaches and my clients. That we've worked with thousands of clients already in 30 countries around the world, and it's been 6 years already. It's been more than I could ever ask for.
What was some of the things that you learned in that process? Because I mean, I know some of the listeners of the podcast and guests too are other ADHD coaches or aspiring coaches. Tell me a little bit about the process of going from so you go out on your own or with your partner or your business partner as an ADHD coach. Tell me about that learning curve as far as entrepreneurship and you mentioned being fully booked. I think that's every coach's dream, right? Just to be fully booked.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm glad that you asked that, because I am actually working with ADHD coaches to help them build their business without burnout, because a lot of people have asked me that question, and I said, you know what, I have to create something. So I do have a small group, and I have a book coming out on that. But knowing business as I do now, 50% of business owners after 2 years quit because they're plateauing and they're not knowing how to get out of that. So they think that that's it for them. And then 2 to 3 years after those 2 years, another 50% of people quit for the same reason. So now you're left with 25% of people. So the first thing that I would say is don't do what everyone else is doing. Follow what energizes you and do that. And don't niche down contrary to marketers' advice until you take all of the clients that you're looking for. I think so many people think I have to do a niche. But until you have clients under your belt, how do you know what it is that you want and what you don't want, right? I thought I wanted students, but now me personally, I'm working with entrepreneurs and professionals. My other coaches are working with students. So I think take everyone when you first start, learn what you like, what you don't like. And once you start getting into the flow, hire a business coach. Help understand the processes, the systems that you need to understand gross revenue, net revenue, overhead, how to start delegating, how to bring on an assistant, how to know the tasks that you want to focus on, know the tasks that you shouldn't be focusing on, know how to know your numbers. Or eventually buy my book, and you could read it there too.
Yeah.
But I think it's really just diving in head first in the beginning and exploring all of your options and knowing what works best for you. And one of the best advice that I got when I first started coaching was give it 6 months. Give it 6 months, see if that can be a revenue generator for you and it can give you what you're looking for. So I think that's an accurate window of time to, if you were to go full time into being an ADHD coach, get in there, start reaching out to people in similar fields, network with them, put yourself online, start generating reviews, get into the field, do things that you probably wouldn't do in 5 years. When I first started, I was driving an hour and 15 minutes to Miami to work with a fifth grade student for 60 minutes to drive right back for an hour and 15 minutes on a Sunday. So there was less traffic. So I was there a total of 3 hours and 30 minutes for $90. I would never, ever do that again. But I was building a business. So humble yourself a little bit. And when you first get into your business, try everything. You're building a business and it's hard and it takes time and things do not happen overnight, regardless if you see it on social media.
Oh yeah. Don't believe anything there. Social media.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No. People say, oh, I was $100,000 in debt and then I did this and now all is great and I'm a millionaire or whatever. I have thousands of clients, but what they don't show is all of the work that went into it. So really make sure that you are putting in the time, the effort, know that it is going to be a time investment, and invest after some time into some sort of business building so you can build your business, because a business is exactly that. Like, you could be the best coach in the world, but if you don't have business skills, likely your business will not grow and it might shrink and fail. So as you're starting to build a rhythm for yourself, invest in some business coaching, some business books, what have you, some mentoring, so you know where to go and how to track everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's great. Great advice.
And one of the other first things I would say is your first delegation should be a bookkeeper.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. That's important.
Don't do the books yourself.
Yeah. That's important. That's very important. No, that's great advice. You said a lot of good stuff there. I have a history in digital marketing, and I was a speaker for, like, a trainer and speaker for Google for about 6 years. And
amazing.
So I taught like thousands of business owners how to grow their businesses online. And I have a pretty rich background in digital marketing to begin with. And every time I see something online where somebody says the term 7 figures,
oh gosh,
or 8 figures, I run. And I warn people that, there's so much snake oil out there. And I did a video about this recently and got some great feedback from, like, a lot of great love from people, because, I was like, 8 figures. Like, how do we not know that all the figures are 0? Because isn't 0
so
a figure?
Good. I love that.
Right?
I love that. It could be like 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Way to go. $1. You're amazing. I want to learn what you know.
But also you're in the people business, right? Like, I understand that we need money to survive, but that is not one of my core values in this business. My core value, and I think it comes through to people who call, is relationships. And I think if you're going into coaching for money, you need to run the other way, because this is not a lucrative business for most people. On average, this is a $60,000 a year job. So if you think that you're going into coaching for 7 figures, 8 figures, you're going in for the wrong reasons. That's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with you too. And you do like videos and podcasting too yourself, right?
I do. Yeah. I do. And it's funny. So, like, I scaled naturally. So I did not do videos and podcasting when I first started. I actually hate showing up on videos. I love public speaking, don't get me wrong, but on social media, not so much. So I had another company reach out to me and say, hey, would you do a co-hosting webisode series? So that's how I started in podcasting in 2020. It was called ADHD Power Tools. It's still up there on YouTube. And then I finally received a client who was a podcast coach. So after he stopped working with me, I said, look, I've been dying to, now I finally have the confidence because I did this with someone else, but I don't know where to start. I don't know what microphone I need. I don't know what equipment I need. I'm so overwhelmed with the details. Help me start. And so his name's Mark Ronick, and I talk openly about it because he does too. And he helped me get started on a podcast, and now his team does my editing. Yeah. And now I show up because I'm having natural conversations with people, and all those like little like technical details I don't have to think about, right? So I was able to delegate that execution stuff to him. And I have been meeting some of the most amazing people in the world that were my idols when I first started. And it's the coolest thing. It wasn't even the goal of the podcast. The goal of the podcast was to show up for as many ADHDers as possible. But in it, I've built a lot of relationships, which has been amazing.
Yeah, podcasting's such a great medium. I studied radio and television broadcasting before going back to school and studying business marketing and communications. And I started podcasting. Next year will be 20 years podcasting for me.
Wow.
But had I known I had ADHD, I would have stayed with the first one. And then I would have like Joe Rogan money
Oh my gosh.
But instead, I've had like 7 or 8 podcasts over the years. But I expect this Wise Squirrels will be the last one now that I'm being treated for my ADHD. And also because this is also probably my second or maybe first most successful podcast because of the feedback I get from listeners, the reviews, and it's just every time I get a review or an email or anything, it just like, or a Patreon subscriber, even better, it just warms my heart. Like, and it helps me realize that, you know, what I'm doing is worthwhile. Yeah. Yeah. And so with podcasting, but the thing is for me, like having this history, I edit my own shows. Like I do everything myself, but I do it because it's a lot of work. I have a pretty good system down, but it is a lot of work. But one of the reasons why I do it myself is because there's something called the production effect in psychology where you remember things audibly when you say it out loud. Sort of like, you know, when you meet somebody at a networking event, you say their name, you know, it's nice to meet you, Brooke. Oh, what brings you to the event, Brooke? Oh, yeah. Well, it was great chatting, Brooke. You know, hopefully I'll see you next time. And you say it out loud several times, and that helps you retain that name. I teach a lot. I do a lot of corporate training and workshops about communication skills. And I wrote a book called New Business Networking. So networking is a topic near and dear to my heart. And so I say all this because when I edit the podcast, it helps me, like I genuinely want to learn from you. You know, I want to learn from my guests about this stuff. And so when I edit, I get to listen again and again through the editing process. And that helps me. And I also get rid of some of the stupid stuff I say.
Yeah. Like interesting.
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 Ding, 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 ding. We'll pause for a quick drink. All right. There you go.
I love that. And, you know, you say networking, and I think it's great that you've gotten into this field, right? Because I think in business, you have to, it's relationships, whether it's networking or internal. And one thing that I think so many of us fail to recognize is once you build a business, like don't forget about the clients that you're building, right? Like these are the people that you serve. Like stop focusing so much on the external marketing and sales and start like looking inward into how you can help the clients that you do have even more and ask them for what they want. And that's really how I've grown, by asking them what they want, what they need, what's the future for them. And that's how I've organically created the systems in Coaching with Brooke.
And tell me about some of the systems that have helped you run your business in a way that like other entrepreneurs can learn from, maybe whether it's software. I know it's all different for different people, of course, but what are some of the strategies or things that have worked for you?
Well, particularly, and this is not answering your question, but I'll get back to it if it's okay. But
yeah, of course.
Particularly for the clients, like when I first started, I was doing one-on-one coaching, and one of my clients said to me, I love this, but I would also love to learn from other people that you're working with. So organically, I put all my clients together in a small group, came up with the themes of what was going on in their life. They all learned from each other. I came up with lessons every week, and then did it again with the same people because they liked it, and then created our signature process, 3C activation. So that was one thing that was created organically based on their needs. Another thing that we did was healing ADHD emotions, which was an emotional regulation course. Okay, but to answer your question on things that have made the business building easier, I would say the number one software that I love that has helped me was Asana. In growing with my coaches, with my assistant, using an Asana board where we can dump all of the things we're thinking about, where we don't have to verbally or impulsively share it with the coaches or with my assistant until we have our meeting, has been so helpful because it gets it out of my head. It gets it onto a board where we're both looking at it and we check it off when we meet. Yeah. That has been super helpful.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Software It can be so helpful. And yeah, it's strange. I actually just discovered, I didn't just discover it. I've known about it and I poked at it over the years, but I only just started using Notion. And it's, I think it's notion.io, I think. And it's, not a sponsorship. Maybe they should be paying me. But yeah, it's really fantastic. And I like it in a similar sort of way to Asana, where you have you could have visual boards. It's a great thing. So I do recommend, anybody who's like, I work for myself for the most part. I've got a couple people that help me with some stuff, but for the most part, it's myself. So I just have my single Notion license, and I use that just to keep up with my meetings and my notes and things I got to do each day, and the urgency and the due dates and all that stuff too. Because as we know with ADHD, if you don't have a due date and you don't see it looming, that's not going to be a good situation for you to actually finish anything. And certainly my book, my next book that I'm working on now is a great example of that, where my first book I did with a traditional publisher. And so I had like deliverable dates and all that stuff. So I had a contract. I had to legally, hand off the sections as promised and as legally agreed. And that was with undiagnosed ADHD somehow. I don't know how I did that. But my next one I'm self-publishing, and so that one's taken way longer.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. So my first book was self-published, and my second book is going to be self-published too. And the way that I was accountable was literally setting goals with my business coach and coming back to those accountability dates with them.
Yeah. It's just the power of having a coach, right? I mean, I'm coaching two people right now. I'm not an ADHD coach, nor do I play one on the internet, but I am a coach with ADHD. And so I know a couple things. In fact, my ADHD coach was like, she was like, Dave, oh my God, you know more than I do now. Because I've been so all in on Wise Squirrels.
The podcast too, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much you learn.
Yeah.
And when you said what software do you use? Of course, there's great software, like you said, Notion, Asana. But I think the basic thing is don't get so caught up in the software. Just find a place, whatever it is that works for you, and stick to it until it doesn't work. Yeah,
I have a friend, Chase Jarvis, who's kind of like a pretty popular photographer online and things. Anyway, and he I think he coined the term. It was like in the photography world, it's like the best camera is the camera you have with you. So it's the same sort of thinking, right?
Yeah. It's so funny that you mentioned his name. Is he the one who did Filmmaker Pro? A course for filmmakers? Probably, yeah. He's been, I'm pretty early adopter. So I've been on the internet since the very early days. And so, yeah, we all know one another through like various events and conferences, South by Southwest and all those over the years. Okay, cool. Yeah. So, as far as like executive functioning skills, and I know this is something you do a lot of coaching on, tell me a little bit about I think one of the most confusing things I find with so much about ADHD really, DSM-5 and all that, is, and even diagnosis of ADHD is not always like, it's not 100% necessarily. It's very much reliant on the opinion of the doctor who's seeing you. And I bring that up because there are so many different definitions of executive functioning skills or executive functions, right? Like there's Dr. Brown's are pretty popular, but like some people say there's 6 of them. Some people say there's 8. Some people say there's 12. And sometimes it's the same thing said a different way. How do you define executive functioning skills and maybe some tips on helping folks as far as coaching on that? Well, the DSM-5 is the DSM-5. So regardless of what executive functioning model you go through, if it's Brown or Barclay or someone else's, the executive functions in it are in the DSM-5. So it's just clustered differently with Barclay and Brown. So in the DSM-5, it says that you need to have 6 out of 9 of the executive functioning skills is showing as a deficit in your life in 2 or more areas for over 6 months. So like distractibility, daydreaming, getting started, execution, working memory, processing speed, emotions, all of those are executive functions. So if with Dr. Thomas Brown, let's say we look at his model, he has 6 clusters and they all work together, but you need to have one that is of one or more that's a deficit. So I think the biggest thing for people listening is ADHD does not develop overnight. So if you're an adult who's listening to this podcast, you had to exhibit 6 out of those 9 symptoms before the age of 12. So it might be different symptoms in the DSM-5 that are of, like, you might have been hyperactive, for instance, when you were a child, but not as hyperactive as an adult. So if you don't feel like you're as hyperactive as an adult, don't worry about it. You still might have exhibited some symptoms as a child. So it ranges and it varies over time. And they also, I know there's 3 criterias of ADHD. There's the hyperactive impulsive, which is the classic ADHD from what you think of the boy in the classroom that can't sit still.
Yeah.
Then there's the inattentive, and that was formerly known as ADD. And then there's combined. So it's symptoms of both. Now, psychologists are talking about having no differentiation between those 3 areas and actually just calling it ADHD because the symptoms do change over time. But that has not changed in the DSM-5.
It's such a confusing thing too, because anytime I hear somebody reference ADD, to me, it just means that they've been in this world of ADHD much longer, or they were diagnosed with ADD. Like, because ADHD is just, it is ADD. Like, and I have these conversations with people sometimes and they're confused. And I'm like, no. Like, it just has a new name, basically. Like, it was rebranded, even though some would argue ADHD even isn't a great brand to begin with, but it's better than like hyperkinetic child or whatever the early stuff was. So it's interesting too, with like the DSM-5 being, it's like a star chamber of experts who decide what is in that and what is not. So like things like misophonia or like RSD are not.
RSD is not in it.
It's not in it, even though the assumptions at least are that it is probably associated, but because it's not part of the DSM, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Dr. Bill Dodson talks about rejection sensitivity as being one of like the most classic things that you deal with ADHD. And that is because of like perceived rejection or actual rejection. But as an ADHDer, they say that before the age of 10, we're listening to 20,000 more negative messages than a neurotypical. So like, who wouldn't with ADHD have rejection as an adult or perceived rejection if you're receiving all those negative messages before the age of 10? So I definitely think that rejection, not only rejection sensitive dysphoria, but rejection sensitivity, hypersensitivity is a classic symptom of ADHD. I mean, they say like oversensitivity, the hypersensitive child, right? Like when you hear of that, you start thinking it's a possibility that they might have ADHD. I think all of those are true. I think with misophonia, that can be in different classifications, just like rejection can, but misophonia can be a symptom of autism. It could be a symptom of trauma. It could be a symptom of anxiety. It could be a symptom of ADHD, right? Like, what is causing the misophonia?
Yeah.
I've had misophonia my whole life, but yes.
Yeah.
So I think that ADHD is very complex, and that's why it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I heard someone say that there's like 6,000 different ways ADHD can manifest. And but going back to something you said, it's not the opinion, of course, of the doctor. It's following the checklist with the DSM-5.
Yes.
And that right now is still the most popular way of getting a diagnosis, and what they say as the most accurate way of getting the ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah. And I always tell people, like if you're talking to your family doctor about this, and again, I don't pretend to be a doctor or an ADHD coach on the show or anywhere, but I do tell people, like, ask before going in to talk to your doctor, like your GP or whomever, like ask them, about ADHD, like ask them about their opinion about ADHD, because there's still quacks out there, even doctors, who like don't believe it or something. And if your doctor happens to be one of those doctors, it's time to find a new doctor. So just wanted to point that out. Winding this down, being respectful of your time, Brooke, let us know how we can get a hold of you, learn more about the coaching that you do, because I know you've got a wealth of information and a lot of great stuff. So I want to make sure that everybody checks you out.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. So everything is on Coaching with Brooke with an E. So my website, Instagram is one of our biggest platforms. We have daily tips and free posts there. But if you're an adult, you're a student, or your parent looking to support yourself with chaos to clarity with ADHD, I would go to our website, Coaching with Brooke, and fill out a quick form to apply for a complimentary discovery call.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, would you do me a favor? Would you visit wisesquirrels.com/love? That's where you'll find links to become a Patreon by supporting the show. You can advertise on the show. You can also record an audio comment, question, or even email me a question that I can include in an upcoming episode. And you can even leave a little review to let me know how I'm doing. There's more there. wisesquirrels.com/love. Hey, I'm not sure if you know about this, but I was a speaker and a trainer for Google for nearly 6 years. In addition to this, I've been a coach through a lot of my career, helping small business owners and entrepreneurs improve their businesses. But now with ADHD, I've learned a lot about helping other wise squirrels like me. Check out the link at wisesquirrels.com/coaching and book a free session with me to see if I can help you. I have a feeling I can.